The NATO troops who are currently encircled by the Russian troops in Kursk region are in big trouble. So last week, Donald Trump threatened Vladimir Putin, and just 2 days ago, he apologized to Vladimir Putin again. So Donald Trump said if Putin don't end the war, he's going to put more pressure on the Russian economy. Trump should have known better. The fact that Trump came out to apologize simply means he miscalculated everything. So Donald Trump begged Putin to spare the lives of these NATO troops who are currently being encircled in Kursk region. Putin responded. Putin said, if these NATO troops in Kursk lay down their weapons and surrender to Russia, he promised to follow Geneva Convention rules. For those of you who don't know what Geneva Convention rules are, they are basically rules governing war, what you can do in war and what you can do, right? So according to Geneva Convention, when you capture an enemy, at that point, you have no right to unalive that enemy. At that point, that enemy must be protected by you and he become prisoner of war. The big question is Russian troops willing to let these NATO troops go scot-free? Many of you don't know this, but when NATO and Ukrainian troops first went to Kursk, they unalived a lot of civilians. They tortured some of them. Some of them you can't even watch. It was too much. And they were bragging about it. When you look at the Kursk invasion militarily, it doesn't make any sense. The part of Kursk, which is controlled by NATO currently, there is nothing strategic there militarily. There's nothing strategic. So when they went there, out of frustration, out of what the Russians, have done to them in the Donbass by capturing more territories, these guys were frustrated. So the only thing they did was to go after civilians. That led to the evacuation of civilians from the Kursk region. Don't get me wrong, in every war, civilians are unalived, but it's always a mistake. In this case, this was not a mistake. It was a deliberate attempt. They even decided to record what they were doing to these innocent civilians in Kursk. For reasons like this, that is the main reason why International Court of Justice was established. But rather unfortunate, the court has lost its credibility, and it's very difficult to predict anything. Very difficult. Because clearly the other side is not following the rules. So why should the Russians also follow the rules? Well, interesting time ahead. I remember when I told you guys that the Ukrainian troops or NATO troops who are currently being encircled is around 80,000. A lot of people were like, oh, Timo, you made a mistake. It's not up to 80,000. They are just 8,000. Are you guys serious? 8,000? When the Ukrainians first entered Kursk, the emergency troops that the Russians deployed was somewhere around 40,000. So if they were just 8,000 and the Russians sent in about 40,000, the Russians would have overpowered them easily. When the Russians brought in these emergency troops, NATO decided to double up. They brought in more troops and the Russians also brought in more troops. So looking at what is happening in Kursk, it is not small. Many people don't understand. The Ukrainians have brought in large together with NATO. Not. I've told you guys several times that when you look at Kursk, there are more foreigners than Ukrainians. Most of them are NATO troops. That is the honest fact. When the war began, I remember telling you guys here, I keep talking about history. The history of Russia remains the same. And it's rather unfortunate. NATO didn't learn from history. In Second World War, the Battle of Kursk is also known as the Battle of Tanks. It is the biggest tank battle in the history of warfare. When the Nazis were defeated in Stalingrad, Hitler decided to throw everything in. He decided to take Kursk at all costs, but he failed. NATO is doing the same mistake. NATO has done everything possible to make Ukraine win. But when you look at the front lines in Ukraine, everything is obvious that Ukraine and NATO is not going to win. Out of frustration, they decided to use the exact tactics that the Nazis used. Capture Kursk and use Kursk as a bargaining chip. And rather unfortunate for them, the Russians, automatically, they've taken back Kursk, whether you like it or not. When they started talking about 30 days ceasefire, I remember I recorded a video last week and I told you guys that the Russians are not going to negotiate if even 1 inch of their territory is occupied by NATO or Ukraine. I told you guys that the only condition for peace is if NATO and Ukraine are all willing to follow the terms and conditions of the Russians. And I was right. So the Russians prepared a peace plan. And looking at what is currently going on, NATO is not willing to follow the terms and conditions of the Russians. And obviously, the war is not going to end. The Russians are going to continue. Well, time will tell. Interesting time ahead. Don't forget to hit on the like button. Shalom. See you guys in the next episode.